Today's daf, which is the last daf in the Succah, is daf Nun Vav. We'll begin on daf Nun Hayim and Beis, where we left off yesterday in the Gemara, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the bottom. The Mishnah told us that the Kohanim, all the Kohanim from all the different Mishmaros, would be mischalik. They would divide up the Emurei Haragolim. And the Gemara immediately objects, Emurei Haragolim, so Gavanim, the word Emurim in its technical use has the connotation of the chalavim that are burnt on the Mizbeach. How can you divide them up amongst the Kohanim? Rav Chisda tells us that the word Emurim also has another meaning to it. Masha Amur, and in this case, Biragolim. So when it says Emurei Haragolim, it means that which is designated on the regolim. We speak about it, the Torah speaks about it. These are the karbanos that you have to be makriv on the regel. And those karbanos are divided up amongst all the Kohanim from all the different mishmaros equally. What is the source in the Torah from which we derive that although the rest of the year each mishmar has to be on duty, he's got his mishmar kavua, and then he gets to do the avoda and he gets to eat from the basar korban. But on a regel, any of the three regalim, all the kohanim, even those who are not on that mishmar, they're not on duty officially, they still have rights to do the avoda, to participate in the hakrava, and to eat from the korbanos. Talmud Lo, we derive this from a pasuk in Dvarim, Perek Yud Ches, and I'll read the entire pasuk. The Gemara only quotes part of the pasuk. V'chiyavo halevi, and then it says me'achad sharecha, one gate. We'll see what that means in a minute. Mikol Yisrael shehu gar sham uba b'chol avas nafsho. He comes with all his desire to the makom asher yivchar Hashem. He comes to the Beis Hamikdash, and here the word Levi includes not only the Leviim who want to do their avodah in the Mikdash, but also the Kohanim. They're also part of Shevet Levi. And then the Torah says, "V'sheres b'shem Hashem Elokecha kechol echad." It means that if he has that avas nafsho, he has that inner motivation to come and participate in the avodah, then we cannot prevent him from doing so, because the Torah says "V'sheres," and he will serve. The Kohen who comes to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, and we allow him to do the avodah, and even the Mishmar Kavua, whose time is designated at that regel, nevertheless they cannot prevent him from coming to do the avodah. And once he's zochet to do the avodah, then automatically, ipso facto, he has rights to eat from the korbanos, the menachos that he's makriv, and that's based on a pasuk in Vayikra Zayin. La Kohen Hamakriv Osa Lo Siyeh. The Brisa continues. Yochel, I might think, Af Bishar Yemos Hashana Kohen, that any Kohen, even during the balance of the year, has a right to come to the Beis Hamikdash, B'chol Avas Nafsho, with his motivation and desire to do the avodah, and we have to allow him to do so. Talmud Lomar, we have a pasuk that indicates that that's not so, because the parsha in Dvarim Yud Ches adds the words me'achad sharecha, from one gate. What does that mean, one entranceway? And a gate is usually in the Torah a gate to a city. Lo amarti, when did I say that a Kohen who wants to do the avodah b'makriv has a right to come, even though he's not in that mishmar? Ela b'shah shekol Yisrael nichnasim b'shar ech. Only when the entire Jewish people enter into the city through one gate. And which city is that? Yerushalayim. And when do all the people of Israel enter into the gates of Yerushalayim? That's during the regalim, when there's a mitzvah of aliyah l'regel. So that's when the Kohanim have rights, any Kohen from any mishmeres, to come and do the avodah and to eat from the korbanos. The Mishnah tells us ubechiluk lechem hapodim, that the lechem hapodim is divided up equally on the Shabbos of a regel amongst the Kohanim. And you might ask, well, there are only 12 loaves of bread, so how do you divide 12 loaves amongst so many myriads of Kohanim. But the Gemara says elsewhere that each Kohen got Gipul Halavan. And it was a miracle that even though he got a small bean size of the Lechem HaPanim, nevertheless it satiated him and he reached a state of simcha, of happiness. Now there's a big chiddush here in this Mishnah because Lechem HaPanim really should not be divided up amongst all the Kohanim. And the reason for that is because Lechem HaPanim is something that applies every Shabbos, the entire year round. Now there's an overlap between Shabbos and Regel. Why should the Kohen have a right to demand, like he does with regard to the Karbonos of the Regalim, a participation in the Lechem HaPanim? But the Gemara now is going to quote a pasuk that's going to teach us. It's Tanur Rabbanu, we learned in the Brayso Minayin, Shekol HaMishmaros Shavos, that on a Regel, all the Mishmaros, even those Mishmaros that are not officially on duty during this Regel, they are all equal b'chiluk Lechem HaPanim, and they can all receive an equal amount in the Lechem HaPanim. And the question of the Brayso is a very profound question. Why would the Kohanim in a different Mishmar have a right to Lechem HaPanim? They only have a right to the Karbonos of the Regel. Like, for example, the Karban Tamid. The Kohanim, even on a Regel, don't have rights to push themselves in to do the Avodah or to receive a chelik in the, well, actually, Tamid is not such a great example because that's a Karban Ola, but let's say they want to get the Oros, they don't have rights to do so. Why? Because the Karban Tamid has nothing to do with the Regel. It's not Ba Machmas HaRegel. Only those Karbanos that are generated by the Regel, that's where the Torah says all the Mishmaros have an equal right. But not to Lechem HaPanim. And now we start today's daf with Vav Amanav Talmud Loma. Where do we derive? This is from the next part of the same pasuk that we were reading earlier in Dvarim Yud Ches, and that was addressing the Kohanim who are serving during the Regel. And the Torah says, "V'shereis b'shem Hashem Elokav kechol echav haLeviyim homdim sham l'fnei Hashem chelek kechelek yochelu." And here you have to underline the word yochelu. So we're talking about something which the Torah is adding that would not be included under Karbanos. Why isn't it included amongst the Karbanos? Because we're talking about something that's eaten, and that's in its entire purpose. Right? The entire essence of that chayfetz, of that object, is yochelu. Just like in the avoda, all the mishmaros have a chelik, so too in something which is only necha. It has no din of hakrava or avoda. It's purely for purposes of achila. So too the Kohanim have a chelik. Umay achila. And what is this case, this category of achila? Ilem, if you're talking about karbanos, if you're talking about the fact that if the Kohen does the avoda, he gets the achila of the carbon, may hasam nafka. The Gemara asks a rhetorical question. Are you going to derive from this pasuk? La Kohen ha'makriv osa lo siyeh. The Torah, as we mentioned earlier, in Vayikra Perek Zayin, establishes that the makriv has rights to eat from his carbon. So what is the Torah adding here by saying chelek kechelek yochelu? We're going to divvy it up when it's chelu, it's la achila. Ella, we have no choice, but it means lechem hapanim. Lechem hapanim has no avoda, there's no akrava. All we do is we put it on the shulchan, we wait a week from Shabbos to Shabbos, and the next Shabbos we take it off the shulchan, and the Kohanim eat the lechem hapanim. So the lechem hapanim is indicated here by this pasuk because it's yochelu, and the entire essence of lechem hapanim is achila. And the Gemara now quotes the next part of the same Brayso. Yochai might think, Af b'chovos habos, shalom achmas haregel. The regel, let's say there's an overlap of a carbon chovam, which now has to be fulfilled on the regel. Like, for example, let's say you have a musaf of Shabbos, and Shabbos coincides with the regel. Do the Kohanim and other mishmaros who are not on duty have rights to say, well, we want to be makriv and eat from the carbon musaf? Again, that's not a good example of eating because carbon muslim is carbon ola. But in any event, the Raisa quotes Talmud Lomar in the next part of the Pasuk in Dvarim Yud Ches. It says, Levad mimkarov al ha'avos. Now, the word mimkarov here, which literally translates as sale, really should be translated in this context as a barter, an exchange. And the avos, meaning the fathers of the Kohanim, going back generations earlier and earlier, would do a barter exchange. What kind of barter exchange would they do? Ma machru ha'avos. What was this exchange? Zeh one to the other. And the answer is, Ani b'shabti, I will serve in the Beis Hamikdash on my week, v'ata, and you'll serve b'shabbatcha on your week. In other words, all the karbonos that come because of the Zman itself, that special time period, generates a carbon, those are not divvied up. They're not divvied up. Even if they come during the regular, you can only say, look, my mishmeres is going to work on this week, and your mishmeres is going to work on that week. But each mishmeres is designated to its own week and has no right to encroach upon a different week, which is designated for another mishmeres. That's called ani b'shabtai, vata b'shabtai. And that's telling me that any karbonos that come at any time during the year, even if they have to be generated by the Zman of Regel, so that's coincidental. And then we go back to the pasuk that says, Levad mimkarav al ha'avos. Mishnah tells us, Batseres, Omer lo helech matzah vehelech chametz, because the Kohanim will eat both from the lechem aponim and the shtei lechem. The shtei lechem is chametz, and the lechem aponim is matzah. And now we're about to embark upon a fascinating machlokes, and I wish we had hours and hours to spend on this. But in any event, we learned earlier on Daf Mem Vav that when a person builds a sukkah, he recites Shechion. When he enters into the sukkah, on the night of Sukkot, then he recites the bracha Leishev Bas Sukkah. How a sugi is going to approach the following case, and that is he did not recite Shechionu when he built his sukkah. And now when he goes into the sukkah on the first night of Yom Tov, he will recite Shechionu in addition to the bracha of Leishev Bas Sukkah. And now the Gemara is going to present a machlokes in what sequence, in this case where he did not recite Shechionu on the building of the sukkah, and he's now on the night of Sukkot, and he's reciting two brachos. He's reciting Shechionu, and he's reciting Leishev Bas Sukkah. Which bracha should he make first? Itmar. Rav Omar Sukkah, meaning Leishev Bas Sukkah, the Achar Kach Zman, and then Shechionu. Rabba Bar Bachon Omar Zman, first Shechionu, the Achar Kach Sukkah, and only afterwards Leishev Bas Sukkah. And Rashi seems to imply here, and this is embellished by many of the Achronim, that since he didn't recite a Shechionu when he built the sukkah, he has to recite Shechionu the night of the sukkah. And therefore it makes sense that since this Shechionu is a carryover, so to speak, from the earlier obligation when he built his sukkah, therefore it should come first. And that would support the Shita of Rabba Bar Bachana. The Gemara now analyzes this machlok. Rav Omar, Sukkah, first Sukkah, V'akach, Zman, and then Shechionu, Chiyuva Diyoma Adif. The Chiyuv of the day, which in this case is Yeshiva B'Sukkah, that's the Chovas Hayom, that takes priority. Rabba Bar Bachana Amar, Zman the Achakav Sukkah. Why? Tadir v'sheino tadir tadir kodem. Even though you're right, Rabba, I agree with you, says Rabba, that the Chovas Hayom has a special significance, but we have another principle in halacha, and that's a general principle that goes way beyond the confines of brachos, and that is tadir kodem. Shechianu is tadir kodem. Why? So Rashi tells us that tadir kodem in this context means that it's a bracha that recited not just on Sukkot, but on all three regalim. Other Mefarshim say that it's tadir because if you build a new house, or you buy something significant, or if you have a new fruit, and any new mitzvah that comes from time to time, all of the above generate Shechianu. So there are many, many myriads of occasions on which we recite Shechianu, and that upgrades the status of Shechianu to tadir. Whereas Leishe Basukah is only limited to the 7 days. We can even go a step further. If you recall, we had one shita that you would recite Leishe Basukah once, and that would cover you for Yom HaRichta for the entire 7 days. It's only because you had a Hesech Hadas and you went out of the Sukkah, that's why you make another bracha. But whatever way you go, the mitzvah of Sukkah generates the bracha of Leishe Basukah. That's limited to 7 days. Shechianu applies even outside and beyond the context of Sukkah. The Gemara suggests, Lema, perhaps, Rav Barachana, this machlokes is really a reflection of a more basic, older machlokes. Beplugta de Beit Shammai Beisil Pamifli. And Beit Shammai Beisil have a machlokes in what's called Dvarim Shebeseuda. And there's a whole list of issues regarding Seuda, Hilchas Seuda, in a Mishnah and a Brisa in Masechet Brachos on Daf Nun Aleph, where there's a whole long list of enumerated machlokas. But we're interested in focusing on one particular machlokas with regard to the Seuda. Beit Shammai uBeit Hillel b'Seuda. Beit Shammai Omrim, and now we're going to quote only one of those various machlokasin, and that is with regard to Kiddush on the night of Shabbos. According to Beit Shammai, Mevarech al Hayom, the Achakach Mevarech al Hayayin. And truth be told, this sounds awfully similar to Rav Shita. Remember, Rav wanted to say that let's start with Leishe Basukah. And the reason for that is Leishe Basukah, we said, is a Chovas Hayom. Beit Shammai, reflecting that same line of reasoning, says that the bracha on Kiddush, which ends with Mekadesh HaShabbos, should be first because that's the Chovas Hayom. The Achakach, Mevarech al Yayin. Yayin, Borei Pri Hagofen, is a secondary bracha because why are we drinking Yayin? We're only drinking Yayin because the day has a Chovas Hayom. It was sanctified with Kiddush Sayom. So let's start with the bracha on Kiddush Sayom. Beis Hillel, they disagree. Mevarech al Hayayin, first recite Borei Pri Hagofen. The Achakach Mevarech al Hayom. So the Gemara now analyzes the two shitas of Beis Hillel, Beit Shammai, and then compares them to the two shitas of Rav and Rabbah in the case of Sukkot. Beit Shammai Omer with regard to Kiddush on Friday night. Mevarech al Hayom, first you recite Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos. The Achakach Mevarech al Yayin, then you make your Borei Pri Hagofen. And that's based on two logical principles. Number one, Hayom Gorem Liyayin Sheyavo. In other words, the Chovas Hayom, the Kiddush Hayom, is the background to why we're drinking Yayin. If it wasn't Shabbos and it wasn't Kiddush, we would not be drinking wine before Asuda. And therefore, we should make the bracha on the Yom first. And furthermore, Kvar Kiddush Hayom, Badayin Yayin Lo Bo, which came first? The obligation to recite Borei Pri Hagofen or the recitation of Kiddush. Kiddush came first because the moment that sun sets, or at least Tzeis HaKochavim, the stars come out, at that moment there's Kedushas Hayom and you have to make Kiddush. I don't even have Yayin on the table. And therefore, Kiddush should come first. Beis Hillel Omrim Mevarech al Yayin v'Achakach Mevarech al Hayom. We're more familiar with that. One reason is because Hayayin Gorim L'Kiddush Shetei Omer. In other words, in the absence of Yayin, we would not recite Kiddush. And this is a bit complicated because we recite Kiddush even without wine, but that's the Kiddush in Tefillah. Now we're talking about a second Kiddush that's not integrated into the prayers of Friday night, but that we recite on the Yayin. So first make the bracha on that which sets up and makes it possible to be Mekayim a Chov of Kiddush. Davar Acher, and furthermore, Birchas hayayin tedira, ubirchas hayom eino tedira. We drink wine the whole year round. We make that bracha bar pri hagaf the whole year round. That's tadir. Whereas birchas hayom is only once a week. Eino tedira. And we have a principle tadir v'sheina tadir koda. Gemara says, Lema, shall we suggest Rav di Omar Kibet Shammai, the Rav Bar Chana di Omar Kibet Hillel? There's a certain striking similarity here between Rav and Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai holds that Kiddush comes first and then Yayin. And why does Kiddush come first? Because of the Chovas Hayom. That what sets up this Kiddush, it's the Yom itself. And even though Yayin admittedly is tadir, but nevertheless the Chovas Hayom is primary, and that's what generates the drinking of the wine. Therefore, we make the bracha on Kiddush first. Rav applies a very similar logic, and he wants Leishi Basukkah first because Leishi Basukkah is a Chovas Hayom, and Shechionu is secondary. And even though Shechionu has what? As the Milo, the extra element of Tadir, nevertheless, that loses out to the Chovas Hayom. We have a perfect match now between Rav and Beit Shammai. Both put the Chovas Hayom first, and Tadir is on the back burners. Rav Bar Chana, on the other hand, the Omar Kibet Hillel, and that means everything depends on Tadir. And just like Beis Hillel hold, that Birchas Hayayin, Bar Pri Gofen comes first in Kiddush because it's Tadir, which was the second reason of Beis Hillel. So too, Rav Bar Chana wants to make the bracha of Shechianu before Leishi Basukkah because Shechianu is Tadir. And the Gemara now says this is not so. We do not have to make these two debates interdependent. They're independent. Rav will argue, Anodi Amri Afilu Beis Hillel. And you can imagine that Rav has vested interest here. He wants to reconcile himself with Beis Hillel because we passing like Beis Hillel. And the bracha that comes first is going to be the bracha on Yayin and then Kiddush later. Why would Rav agree to that? Because Yayin is Tadir. You'll ask me, if that be the case, then Rav should have agreed that we start with Shechianu. Shechianu is more frequent than Leishi Basukkah. Ad kan lo kamer Beis Hillel Hasam. When does Beis Hillel give sequential priority to Yayin and then comes Kiddush? Elo, that's only Shayayin Gorem L'Kidusha Sheteyomeh. Now we're going back to the first explanation of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel is not based upon Tadir, but rather it's based on the question of where is the Yom? What generates Kiddush? Kiddush is generated by the Yom. I'm sorry. Let me go one step further. I want to embellish what I just said. Kiddush is engendered by the Yom. However, there would be no Kiddush if there was no Yayin, because the Kiddush that's engendered by the Yom, he already fulfilled in Ma'ariv, in Tefillah. The second Kiddush is generated by the Yayin. But Hacha, you can't tell me in this case that Shechianu is generating the mitzvah of Sukkah. Ilav, Zman, let's say for whatever reason he would not make the bracha over Zman of Shechianu, Milo Amrina Leishe Basukkah, all 7 days of Sukkot, he's going to be Mavarech Leishe Basukkah. And therefore, the bracha of Shechianu is not a precondition to Leishe Basukkah. In the case of Kiddush, Beis Hillel has Yayin first. Why? Because the Yayin is the precondition to Kiddush. In the absence of Yayin, there's no Kiddush. But you cannot argue, says Rav, that Shechianu is the precondition for the bracha of Leishe Basukkah. The mitzvah of Leishe Basukkah and its bracha applies 7 days of Sukkot, irrelevant and independent of Shechianu. And therefore, according to Rav, let's go back to Chiyuva Diyom, and the Chiyuva Diyom is Sukkah. Therefore, Leishe Basukkah should come first. But Rav Bar Chana Omar L'cha, Ano Diami Afilu Kibeis Shammai, which is really interesting. What was the push here to work out with Beit Shammai? We don't pass like Beit Shammai. And in any event, but Beit Shammai holds that first we make the bracha on the Kiddush, which is the Chovas Hayom, and then only afterwards on the Yayin. That's despite the fact that Yayin is Tadi. The Bar Pri HaGomen is Tadi. So now if you can ask me that question, then we should make the bracha on Sukkah first. Right? And Rabbi was the one who says make the bracha of Shechianu first. We should be making the bracha on Sukkah because Sukkah is a Chovas Hayom. And just like the bracha of Kiddush, according to Beit Shammai, gets preference because it is Chovas Hayom, so too Sukkah is Chovas Hayom. Ad kan lo kama Beit Shammai also. When do they say in Kiddush that first we make the bracha on the Kiddush and then afterwards on the Yayin? Ella Shayom Gorem Liyayin Shiyavo. Now again, it's true, and Beit Shammai can't deny that there won't be any Kiddush without Yayin. But what generates the chiyuv of Kiddush and Yayin? He's only making bracha on Yayin because of the Kiddush Sayom. And therefore, we should be mevarach on the Kiddush Sayom and Kaddish Shabbos before the Yayin. Aval Hochem, in the case of Mitzvah Sukkah, Ilav Sukkah Milo Amrina Zman, there's a separate Mechayev of Zman that's generated by the Kiddush Sayom. And therefore, in such a case, Beit Shammai would agree that we should start with Shechianu. And we learned in the Mishnah, our Mishnah, the Atzeres on Chag HaShavuos, if it overlaps with Shabbos, and we divide up the Lechem HaKodev and the Shtei HaLechem, Omer lo halech matzah halech chametz. And now the question is, why did the Mishnah formulate the sequence of matzah first and chametz second? It may be true during the entire course of the year that lechem aponim is great and it's primary, but not. It sort of takes a back seat on Shavuos when we have a greater mitzvah, and that is Shtei HaLechem, because Shtei HaLechem is essential to the Kedushas Hayom of Atzeres, of Shavuos. And Lechem Aponim is because it happens to be that on this day of Shavuos, it's also Shabbos. So therefore, Ukatani, I don't understand, asks the Gemara, Helich Matzah, Helich Chametz. And the Gemara thinks that this sequence of Helich Matzah, Helich Chametz reflects the sequence of the Chiluk. You remember that we said that we divide up the Lechem HaKohen amongst all the different Mishmaros, all the Kohen, every single last Kohen, when Shabbos overlaps with Regel, in this case with Shavuos, all the Kohanim get rights to the Lechem HaKohen. And of course, to the karbonos of the day, and in this case, the main essence carbon of the day is the Shtei HaLechem. So why does the Mishnah have a sequence of Helech Matzah, that first we're going to give you the Lechem Aponim, and only then Helech Chametz. Then we'll give you the Shtei HaLechem. Shtei HaLechem is Ikar, Matzah is Tofel. So we have to prove from this Mishnah that Rabbi Bar Chana is correct in his machlokas with Rav, that we should put all the emphasis on Tadir. And that's why Rav insists that we recite Shechianu first and Sukkah second. So Tadir is really the most important element. And not only in brachos, but also in the sequence of divvying up matzah and chametz. Lechem Aponim first, and then Shtei HaLechem, because Lechem Aponim is every Shabbos of the year. And that gives it the upgraded status of Tadir. Tshuv to the Rav. And it seems like this Mishnah is contradictory to Rav. Amalcha Rav Tanoi. Rav says, in fact, this is a machlokes. The Sanya, we have a brisa with regard to the Chalukah of the Lechem Aponim and the Shtei HaLechem on Chag HaShavuos. Helech Matzah, Helech Chametz, Abba Shol Omer, Helech Chametz, Ve'elech Matzah. So Rab is going to maintain Abba Shol's sheet that Chovas Hayom is more important than Tadir. Dorash Rav Nachman Barav is a low Kidivir Rav. Tiyomer Sukkah v'achkat zman, elo zman v'achkat Sukkah. He wants to pass like Rabbi Bar Brachana first Shechiyom. Sheshes brother of Idi Omar, he disagrees. But rather Allah is like Rab, Sukkah first, v'achakach Shechiyom v'achkat zman. The Hilchasa, and the Gemara finally comes to a conclusion: Sukkah v'achakach. Now, in the commentaries, which we don't have time for, there's a tremendous issue about Yontif Sheni Shel Goliath and how to set up the sequence of Yontif Sheni, because there, we've already had the first night, and now we're on the second night. In any event, the Mishnah says that Mishmar Shezmano Kavua is Makriv Tmidim Nidarim Nidavis Ushar Karbanos Tzibur. Now, this list in the Mishnah is a list of those karbanos that do not come because it's regular. They're not generated by the regular, like the Tmidim or Nidarim and Nidavis, have nothing to do with the regular. And then the Mishnah adds Usha'ar karbanos tzibur. So the Gemara asks, Lasuye Mai, what did the Mishnah have in mind when it added Shar karbanos tzibur? And the Gemara answers, Lasuye, another two categories of karbanos tzibur that are not mentioned in that Mishnah. Number one, par heling tovachel tzibur. Very quickly, this is a carbon that's brought when most of the tzibur violated Easter kares because of a toes and the ross besin agadol in a davar sheish bo kares. And se'irei avodas kochavim, there's a group of 12 goats that have to be brought by each shevet respectively as a carbon chatus in a case where besin agadol made a mistake, and b'shogeg they were mora hora, they were allowed a violation of an Easter avodas kochavim. And the tzibur followed that mistaken ruling. In both these categories of karbanos, if they happen to coincide with the regel, then the mishmar hakavua, it's not open to all the kohanim of all the mishmars, but dafka to the mishmar kavua. Why? Because even though it's a chova, and today is the regel, but nevertheless, this chova has nothing to do with the regel. And if it's not bo machmas a regel, then only the mishmar kavua that's on duty now has rights to do the avoda and to receive the both. The Mishnah tells us vehu. What does vehu mean? That the mishmar kavua is makriv esakol. Obviously, we're coming to add something. Lasuye mai. What is it coming to add? Lasuye kayitz hamizbeach. Okay, now what's kayitz hamizbeach? First, let me mention that the word kayitz means dessert, something that comes at the end of the meal. It's not a basic critical part of the meal. Now, what's kayitz hamizbeach? When do we feed dessert to the mizbeach? And the answer is, if let's say after they brought the carbon tamid shel shach on any day of the year, they left an allotment of time for Nidarim and Nidavis, and on that particular day, there were no Nidarim and no Nidavis. Nobody came forward to bring a carbon. So now the Mizbeach is sitting idly. And we don't want the Mizbeach to sit idly. We want the Mizbeach to constantly to be fed, so to speak, its karbanos. So what we do is, if there's leftover funds in the shofaros, when people came forward and they gave contributions, and those contributions were for the carbon tzibur, for public carbon, a communal carbon, the monies were put into shofros, which are kupos. Those are, collection containers, which were shaped like a shofar. And again, we could go into a long discussion why it would shape like a shofar in order to block any thievery and so forth. So, but that's not for us now. And if there was leftover money in the shofros, after they used whatever they needed, they used to buy the karbanos tzibur, whatever karbanos they needed. Let's say a talmid, shel shach, and talmid shel ben abayim, a carbon musaf, etc., etc. Now there's leftover funds. Those leftover funds would be earmarked for kayitz hamizbeach. Some call it kayitz hamizbeach. And the question is, what happens in a case where you have a carbon tzibur that's not a chov, it's Ketz HaMizbeach. It was brought on the Mizbeach simply because the Mizbeach was sitting idle. And it's not mi'ikar HaKarbanos. Just like a dessert is not mi'ikar HaKarbanos, but rather it's after the Suda is eaten. And these karbanos are exclusively the domain or the possession of the Mishmar Kavua. And I was very bothered by this. I mean, we said that we only open it up to all the Mishmaros when it's a carbon that's generated by the regel. Obviously, Ketz HaMizbeach is not generated by the regel. And not only that, we already established that the Nedarim and Davos are dedicated exclusively to the Mishmar Kavua. So I don't know why there was a Havamina here that Ketz HaMizbeach would be different than any Neder in the Tov. That I couldn't figure out. The Mishnah says, Yom Tov HaSomach L'Shabbos. If Yom Tov is right near Shabbos, what does that mean? Bein Milfaneh, Bein Milachreh. Whether or not it's a Yom Tov on a Friday, let's say the last day of Yom Tov would be on a Friday. That's called Milafaneh. It's right before Shabbos. Bein Lachreo, if the Yom Tov is on a Sunday, right after Shabbos. And now we have 2 days. Is then Hayu Kol HaMishmaros Shavos B'chiluk Lechem HaPanim. What we would do is that even though Shabbos in this case is not on the regel, it's either after the regel or before the regel. Nevertheless, we gave that Lechem HaPanim of that Shabbos the same status as the Lechem HaPanim of the regel, which means it was opened up to all the Kohanim, all the Mishmaros to be divided up equal. Then the Mishnah says, "B'chal lios yom echad lahafsik beinayim." What happens if there's a day between Yom Tov and Shabbos? Let's say Yom Tov, the last day of Yom Tov is on a Thursday, not on a Friday, or the first day of Yom Tov is on a Monday, not on a Sunday. Is Mishmar Shezmano Kavua, then really the Lechem HaPanim in such a case technically should go to the Mishmar Kavua, and they would get the bulk of the Lechem HaPanim, which means there were 12 loaves, they got 10 out of 12, or Notel Eser Chalos, but a Misakev Notel Shtayim. But in deference, in respect and appreciation for those Karbanos, those Kohanim who either came early or they stayed late. In other words, theoretically, if Yom Tov is on a Monday, they could have gone home on Sunday. But no, they decided to stay and bridge Shabbos to Monday or Thursday to Shabbos. So in respect for them, there was a takana was made that they would get 2 out of the 12 Lechem HaPanim. As far as divvying up the Lechem HaPanim during the entire Shabbos of the year, Hanichnas Notel Sheish, Hayotze Notel Sheish. There are 2 Mishmaros, and they overlap on Shabbos. What do I mean? Last week's Mishmar finishes on Shabbos by taking the Lechem HaPanim off the Shulchan. Now, immediately afterwards, the new incoming Mishmar will replace the Lechem HaPanim with a brand new Lechem HaPanim, fresh. The old Lechem HaPanim is now divvied up between the Mishmar Yotzei and the Mishmar Nichnas, because both Mishmaros overlap on that day. But Rabbi Yehuda has a different view. Omer HaNichnas Notel Sheva, Vayotzei Notel Chamesh. Last week's Mishmar that's finishing up on the Shabbos will only get 5 out of 12. And this one that's incoming gets 7 out of 12. And the reason why the Nichnasim are more chashiv is because they are setting up the new Lechem HaPanim. And we have to indicate that in the Chaluk, in the way we divide up the Lechem. HaNichnasim cholkim v'tzafon. Tzafon is always considered more chashiv than darom. And when we divide up the Lechem HaPanim, that should be reflected in the Azara by giving To the Nichnasim, we said the Mishmeres HaNichneses is more significant, it's primary, and they get, therefore, Suffah. We'll divvy up the Lechem in the north side. The Yotzim, the Darom, Yotzim is referring to the Shmeres HaYotzes. They're already terminated they're no longer Kapal Chafa, they're not wearing that cap. And therefore, we give them Lechem upon them in the less significant area, and that's the Darom. Bilga, there was a Mishmeres called Bilga, and they were subject to a very severe penalty, and Nas is Li Olam Cholekes B'Darom. They were always designated, even when they were in the Mishmeres HaNichneses, they had to go to pick up their share in the challah, in the lechem hapodim, in the, I should say matzah, in the south side. And not only that, the Mishnah tells us even furthermore what other knas do we impose on them? Tabata, kvua, and chalona, stuma. So this is the second and third punitive measures. Number one, there were tabaos. I have a nice picture of it here in my Gemara, and these were semicircles that were attached to the azora, and that made it easier to do the shechita. They would place the neck of the animal through these tabaos, these round rings, and that would hold on to the animal, wouldn't jump in all directions. And in the case of the Mishmeres of Bilga, by penalizing them, they made it such that you couldn't open the tabas. The tabas is meant to be open, and then you put the head in, and then you close it. They had to come and ask other mishmaros if they could borrow their tabaos. And chalona, which means that in the heichal, there is a connection between what's called the heichal and the ulam. Right? The ulam takes you from the mizbeach into the heichal. So the ulam was actually longer than the heichal, and it was longer by 15 amos on each direction. It's spread out in each direction. On the top part that extended beyond the heichal, once again, I have a diagram of this if you want to see it, there were holes drilled, and those were called chalonos, and into those chalonos, they placed the knives, which are called chalifos, a chalif, which, if I'm not mistaken, is an Arabic word, and that's where the knives were stored and taken out for the purpose of shechita. In the case of Mishmeres Bilga, they would actually close up the holes in such a way that they couldn't take out the knives, and they'd have to go borrow them from someone else. And the Gemara is going to discuss why these penalties were imposed on the Mishmeres called Bilga. Now the Gemara analyzes my milfanel, my milachrea. What do you mean by Lefanel Lechrea? If you're going to tell me Lefanel Yontif Rishon, that means the first day of Yontif. That's Chal before Shabbos. It means it's on a Friday. Ulachrea. And what does the Mishnah mean by the word Lachrea? Is Yontif Achra, which means on a Sunday. Yontif is on a Sunday. So Gemara says that's impossible. Why? Because Hainu Shabbos Shem Tov Echad, because if you're talking about the first day of Yontif on what you call it, on Lifnei Shabbos, then this is the same as Shabbos Shem Tov Echad, because in these cases Shabbos it overlaps with the Chag, El Lefanel, but rather Yom Tov Achron. It means that the last day of Yontif is on a Friday, and that's called Lachrea. And Yom Tov Rishon, Lefanea is Yom Tov Achron, and Lachrea is Yom Tov Rishon. Now the Gemara asks my timer, why is it that we're mechalik the lechem upon him even on this Shabbos? Kevon Dahani Makdime, those who came on Friday, they came earlier than Shabbos. And those who came on Sunday, they came later on Shabbos. They stayed over even later beyond Shabbos. In deference, in respect to them, Tikna Rabbana Milsa, the Rabbana wanted to make a takana to thank them and express appreciation, ki hechi tenechlu ba'adi adadu, so that all the Kodim could eat together. Those who are on the Mishmar Kavua, those who aren't on the Mishmar Kavua, they would all come together and eat. And here I have a note, Hatakona hoisa b'chdei shelo yavo riv shar hamishmaros v'yomu l'mishmaros hakvuos harei kevan shanu al korchenu nimtzeinim kan madua lo nikabel lechem upon. We're already here. Why shouldn't we get the lechem upon it? And of course, the mishmaros kavua is going to say, well, you're not on duty. All right, you came early. So you came early. You stayed late, you stayed late. But why should we divvy up the karbonos with you? And therefore, the Rabbanan made a takana to avoid any of these altercations.